Hi, everybody. I'd like to thank you for coming today. This event is sponsored by the Dean's Advisory Council. I'd like to start off by telling you all a little bit about the DAC and what we do for you here in the College of Business. So DAC represents the student organizations here in CoBE, and we bring representatives from every organization in the college together so that each organization gets a voice within the college and what goes on within the college. So say a new class needs to get thrown together, we're part of the people we're part of the group that helps decide, what should go into the curriculum, what's needed with this class. We do quite a bit here in the College of Business. So one of the things we also do is put on speaker events like the speaker we have today. So thank you all again for coming out, and now I'll hand it off to Dean Clements so she can introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
I got a different one. Thanks, Derek. And he forgot to mention one thing about the Dean's Advisory Council, and that is they really are the student voice for the rest of us in the college. So it's an opportunity for us to hear in some sort of regular fashion the insights and the views and the critical issues for students. And so it's an important part of the way we do our work in the College of Business, and we really appreciate it. But as Derek said, they have several activities they do. Probably the most exciting is the sponsorship of the Leaders, Ways, and Wisdom speaker series. This is our third speaker that we've had, and we're very excited about it. It's a really nice opportunity for our students, not just to listen to the faculty talk to them, but also to hear from experienced executives and alumni of UW-Whitewater about how they took what they had here and used it to put together a successful career. So in that regard, it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you today our third speaker, Stephen J. Burrows. Steve is a native of Albany, New York, and he has a bachelor's degree in geography and psychology from UW-Whitewater and an MBA from Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri. He graduated with his undergraduate degree about the same time I did, and I don't want to say any more about that except that it was a really good time to be in college. I should also add that his academic background, which may be of interest to many of you, as I said, he had undergrad in geography and psychology and then an MBA, really supports two beliefs that we hold dear in the college and are very much part of our basic structure. And the first is that a liberal education is critically important to people's success. So sometimes business students say, I wish we didn't have to take this other stuff. I'd just really like to study business. Well, actually, if you want to be successful, your understanding, grasp of the world needs to be broader than that. So Steve's undergraduate degrees in geography and psychology are good evidence of the importance they can play. The second aspect is that he did study professional business, which is near to our hearts. And we really believe that business skills and business capacities and understanding provide the tools to make the world a better place. And Steve will talk to us a bit about that today. After a 30-year career with Anheuser-Busch, where he most recently served as CEO of Anheuser-Busch International, Steve formed Redspider LLC, an international business development and education consultancy. He provides business development consulting and has worked on projects with leading companies in the dairy, pharmaceutical, healthcare, beverages, and alcoholic beverages segments in the US and Asia. In addition, Steve is a professor in residence at Nanjing University in Nanjing, China, and Seinäjoki University in Seinäjoki, Finland, where he teaches a graduate school course entitled Applied Business Strategy. He's also lectured on international business development here at UW-Whitewater, at the University of Missouri-St. Louis, and at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. And I know some of you have been fortunate enough to hear Steve speak in your classes. Steve currently serves on the Board of Managers for Nogam Beverage, the University of Missouri International Business Advisory Board, the Family Resource Center of St. Louis, the Nanjing University Business School Advisory Board, the UW-Whitewater Global Business Resource Center Advisory Board, and the Advisory Board of the College of Letters and Sciences here at UW-Whitewater. He's a member of the Global Advisory Network for Gerson Lehrman Group, the Frontier Strategy Group of Consultants, and the Carlson Research Group, all of which provide business consulting services. Steve lives in St. Louis, Missouri, and as you will find out, he has a special love for all things global, and that's what he does with a lot of his free time. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn the stage over to Steve Burrows. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm on campus today because we had our Dean's Advisory Board meeting for the College of Letters and Sciences, and is almost always the case, I get invited to go to some class rooms to do some talking, and then Dean Clements was kind enough a number of months ago, maybe the last time I was on campus, to see if I might be able to come to this group and share some of my experiences, in this case, in global business management. So I'm really happy to be here and have an opportunity for the next, 45 minutes maybe, sharing some of my experiences, and then having the opportunity to field some questions from all of you. So without any further ado, let's proceed. I'm going to talk about management lessons that I've learned over the 30 years of time that I spent with Anheuser-Busch, both in the domestic U.S. beer business and in the international beer business. And my career was nearly split 50-50, so about 15 years in the U.S. business and about 15 international. And I learned a lot more things than the 11 things that are on this list, but these are the ones that over the years seem to kind of take shape and form in terms of what I believe are important for other people who are in business to learn about and be aware of. So the first one is that culture comes first. The second is do the right things right. The third is have a long-term perspective. Beware of hockey sticks. Fish where the fish are. Partnerships must be a win for both parties. Inspect what you expect, which is not my quote. I think Patton used it the first time, but a lot of people have used that quote, but it's a very useful one in business too. The next lesson is to recruit for talent and then train for skills and knowledge, followed by know your customers, create a good management system, and then make mistakes. So those are the 11 things that I'd like to share with you today, and hopefully we'll have time for plenty of questions and interaction later. And if there's something that you're really dying to ask, just like wave your hand and interrupt me, because it doesn't really need to be that formal of a process. So let's start with culture comes first. No matter who I talk to, whether they're in classrooms or whether they're with businesses, the very first place I start is here. Because especially in international business, but I would argue in any business environment, culture establishes the platform which explains a lot of people's behavior. And so I always start by saying this is one of the most important lessons that I've learned over the years. And when you think about it, if you're in the position where you're trying to start a successful business, you're the person in the middle here, given that responsibility, take a minute and think about all the cultures that you will engage with as you go through the process of trying to have a successful business. The first is, if you're in an international environment, you're going to have a local country culture. So whatever country it is, every country has a unique culture that helps establish the way people behave and the way they look at things in the world and in life and so forth. In addition, there's also a local business culture. In the U.S., we have a certain culture. In other countries, the business culture is somewhat different. And so understanding, not being an expert in these things, but being aware that the differences exist, finding some simple reading materials to familiarize yourself, will help you become sensitive to these cultures, and that will help you as you interact with your overseas business. Then the next two cultures are, of course, our American country culture, and then our American business culture. You know, American business people generally tend to be pretty impatient, which is 180 degrees the opposite of most of the developing world and some pretty important countries like China, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and so forth. So right off the bat, you can see potential for conflict if you don't recognize those differences. So we're up to 4 different cultures to be concerned with. Then you can add in 2 more, and that is, in any business environment, you're going to have your company culture and then the other company's culture, if you're in some form of a partnership or a merger or a joint venture, license agreement or what have you. And of course, those cultures are influenced by the 2 red circles and this one by the 2 blue. And just to add a little more complexity to this cultural scenario I'm painting for you, within companies, there's lots of departments. There's the HR department, the finance department, the marketing department, the sales department, all those departments, and they have their own cultures. And those of you who have been in the working environment can probably identify with that. And how often did you hear the marketing guys say something like, well, if it wasn't for the great marketing, we wouldn't sell anything. Those sales guys, all they do is go out and throw dinners and have parties and buy customers gifts. And then, of course, the sales guys say, well, if it wasn't for us, we'd never sell anything. So there's different, and then the accountants, of course, they don't like anybody because they're just spending money. So you've got all these different cultures going on within a company and within all these other environments. And so it's just important, again, not just in international, but in particular in international, to be aware of these different cultural environments that you're going to be involved with, because, as I said, it shapes the way people behave and act on the other side of the table, and it shapes the way you act and behave to the people who are sitting across from you. So, what are some cultural learning things you can do that don't require you to go and earn a degree in international relations, which you may not have time to do? I didn't. I was thrown into the job and I had to get smart quick. So some of the things you can do is you can take a class locally. You can visit museums. That's a great way to find out about culture. You can use the internet easily and learn a lot about a country and, in many cases, a company. One of the things that I think is useful to do is to read the local paper every day. And I don't mean just if you're going to Europe or South America or Asia. If all of a sudden you're doing business in Los Angeles or San Francisco or New Orleans, read the local paper. It tells you a lot about kind of what's going on in the city, and it gives you a feel for maybe not the pure culture, but certainly the business culture and the issues of the day. And knowing those is going to help you connect more readily with people you're doing business with there. Have big ears. Anybody know what that means? You can just shout it out if you have a clue. Listen. Yeah, listen. And one of the finest compliments I ever received was from a Japanese guy in a joint venture we had there when he said, "Burrows-san, you have big ears." And it was really a great compliment because it said, just as you said, that he felt I listened. Be humble. One of the mistakes I've seen more than one international business person do is come in as a know-it-all. And to position themselves as superior to the other person for whatever reason. So being humble is certainly a good way to deal with the different culturals. And like I said, don't be a know-it-all. Visit local events and historic places. That's another great way to learn something about the culture. Try and learn something about the culture every day. Learn a few simple expressions or greetings. And don't be afraid if you kind of stumble through it, because it's the effort that counts, not necessarily the accuracy. And in my experience, foreigners appreciate it when you try and learn very simple things like good mornings and good afternoons and how are you and thank you and things like that, even if you don't quite get the pronunciation right. Be open and transparent. I mean, that holds true no matter what you're doing in your life, right? But it's also very important here. Establish true relationships, not convenient ones. In a lot of overseas markets, the relationship is the very first thing that you have to have before you'll have anything else. You won't have a business deal until there's some connection in a relationship standpoint, a respect that builds up. And don't try and have a relationship that's convenient for the moment. Make it serious and try and establish friends and deeper relationships than just ones that are going to help facilitate whatever your business goals are. This is something I had to learn. The foreigners I ran into were very curious about the U.S. and asked all kinds of questions and things I didn't know the answer to. So they knew more about the U.S. in many cases than I did. So be prepared to talk about the U.S., what life is like here, what people do, what politics are like. Well, maybe you should leave that aside. But all sorts of everyday things, because people are very interested in that. And then finally, be yourself from day one. Sometimes people come in and they feel like they have to be a little more large-chested or a little bit bigger than they really are, or a little bit more of something that wouldn't be their normal way they carry themselves. Just be yourself, because that's what people are going to react to and work with over a longer period of time. So that's a little bit on culture. Number 2, do the right thing right. What I mean by that is to do with strategy and tactics. So just as a reminder, at least in the way I think, business plans are made up of 2 things, strategy and tactics. Strategy is what you want to do, and tactics is how you're going to do it. So for example, company A wants to build its product in overseas markets. That's sort of a strategy. To do so, the company A has developed 3 business models to expand. Either they're going to own and operate, they're going to license somebody, or they're going to do an export program. And those are the tactics. This is the what, this is the how. And so as you develop a business plan, you got to have the right strategy and the right tactics, and you have to execute them both very well. And of course, that's where things break down frequently. So if you put it on one of these classic Boston Consulting Group grids, and you've got strategy here, you got the wrong strategy and the right strategy, and the right tactics and the wrong tactics, you can wind up in any one of these 4 quadrants. A lot of times you'll wind up here, you've got a good strategy, you just didn't execute the tactics very well. Maybe the advertising was off, the sales force wasn't properly trained, or wasn't going to the right accounts, whatever the case may be. You can learn from that mistake and then fix it and move on and hopefully get better. So that's not a bad place to be, really. The second place you can be is down here. You've got the wrong strategy, but you're doing the tactics for it really well. So that's a good example in my life would have been, we had a joint venture in Japan, and we were doing all the right things, but we were losing $60 million a year because a joint venture was the wrong strategy. A different structure would have been a better strategy. The next possibility is you can be in the worst possible place. You've got a bad strategy and you're not executing your tactics. So you basically need to start over. And then finally, of course, where everybody wants to be is in this quadrant, where you've got a great strategy and terrific tactics that you're executing well. But finding your place on this grid is important, and being honest about the results is the really hard part, because nobody likes to admit anytime you're in the red boxes, right? Because that's admitting a failure or a mistake. And later on, I'll say that making those mistakes are some of the most important things you can do to be successful. Number 3, have a long-term perspective. When you're in business, set a long-term objective of some sort. Is it profit? Is it market share? Is it a new product division? Whatever it is, define your long-term goal. And then you need to develop strategy and tactics to get you there. Is it brands? Is it partnerships? Is it acquisitions? What is it? And importantly, make sure there's milestones established along the way, so that if you don't get there, you can exit and get out and do something else, which is another problem that I've experienced in business, is people don't know when to get out, and they continue to implement their strategy and their tactics without success. So setting milestones and measurable accomplishments is an important part of establishing your long-term plan. And then finally, do what I call the basics right, and these are the basics. this is actually from the strategy class I teach, but more importantly, this is a model that we used in our own planning at Anheuser-Busch for the international division. Every year we said, okay, everybody, the top management, do we have the right brands? Do we have the right partnerships, acquisitions, or other forms of alliances? Do we have the right people, and are we paying them enough and training them well and all that? And do we have a management system to keep this thing moving in a positive direction and making course modifications along the way so that we can correct for any errors? And then lastly, is there a leadership team in place that helps drive the business forward? So if you do these basics right, if you have good brands, develop good partnerships, have a strong HR program, and a system to run your business with good leadership, I can't guarantee you're going to be successful, but you've got a better chance at it than if you don't. So number 4, beware of hockey sticks. This is a good hockey stick. This is a bad hockey stick. So this is the business as you know it. This year, here, then a decline, then a decline, then a decline. And one would say, unless we do something different, it's going to continue to decline. So that's the trend of the business. And when your regional director comes in and says, boss, I'm here to present this year's business plan, and he puts this chart up, which shows a remarkable hockey stick recovery from a steady decline to a steady increase, the first question you should ask is, what are you going to do differently? Because if he or she is not doing anything differently, then there's no reason to believe that's going to happen, because you can't change direction of a business by doing the same things that caused you to go in this direction. So this is this is the bad hockey stick. And I will admit to you that I did put a few of these charts up myself in my business career and showed hockey sticks. And they didn't come true. So as we went through our business planning with our people, we always made sure if we had hockey sticks, we knew something different was going on than was previously. Fish where the fish are, that seems pretty obvious, but you have to have a methodology to know where the fish are, right? So, there's always several ponds you can fish in, and you know that you want to be in the one on the left, but how do you get there? How do you find that pond? Well, in the beer business, we had country criteria. So when you're looking for new opportunities for business development, you need to establish some criteria that separate one place from another. One pond with lots of fish from another pond that doesn't have so many. So in our business, we use basically these 6 categories, broadly speaking, to help identify where we wanted to go, what country we wanted to move into. Later, we decided how we were going to do that, but this was an initial screen. And the screens we used were, how much is the beer industry growing? How big is it, and how much is it growing? And that's just kind of a very high-level measure of what's the potential for the future. I mean, if the thing is small and declining, why would you go there? If it's big and declining, that's another possible warning signal. The next is category volume and growth. In our case, Budweiser competed in the very high end in the overseas markets. So if the premium beer segment was not very big and not growing, then that was sort of a red flag to use caution. If it was large, then perhaps it would be more applicable. So that gave us some brand potential measure. And then we always looked at the absolute operating profit, so that's after tax profit, before tax profit, and operating profit per unit of sale. So yeah, the operating profit is $1 billion. How much is it per unit? Because China, as an example, is the world's largest beer market, but the world's lowest profitability per unit of sale. So that's why you need to see both. It's not necessarily a reason not to go to China, but it's a reason to be aware of that component of the profitability. Per capita consumption and growth of beer. So that's obvious. Do people like beer? And if their per capita consumption is high, that suggests there's not a lot of room to grow. If it's low, then the glass is half full, and there's probably lots of opportunity. GDP per capita and growth. that's an affordability measure, and that's important for beer because over time, the beer industry has learned that a strong GDP is good for beer. And then finally, because in most countries, the primary age for beer consumption is, say, 21 to 35 or 30, knowing that piece of the demographic was important. But it's not always the case because, for example, in Japan, the beer drinking sweet spot is older men above 35 or 40. So that would be an exception to that. So these were just the measures we used in order to establish where the ponds are. So whatever business you're in, just make sure you've got good, measurable data points to decide where you're going to go because it's going to cost money and you don't want to be wrong a lot. Partnerships must be a win-win. Well, yeah, of course they should, but it's hard to do that by just saying it. So one of the things we always look for is, why are you doing this? Why are you having this partnership? Where are you going to do it? With whom? What kind of a business structure? And what's the expected return on that? So being able to answer those questions before you dive into a partnership is pretty critical. So the why. Well, maybe you want access to a new market. You don't have any business in country X, and this partnership opens up new distribution points for you. Or maybe it's access to a new product for my market. So there's a company making widgets in Uzbekistan, and it's a certain kind of widget that you don't have, and you want their widget in the US market. So that's another reason for a partnership. Access to technology is these days one reason that is often the reason people make acquisitions, because someone else has a technology. Think about all these little startup companies over the past 10 years that have been acquired. There's a lot of technology that's being acquired there. Access to management skills. Again, you as a company, and Anheuser-Busch actually would be a good example of this, we were a very US-centric company. And so we didn't have this cadre of globalized business managers, at the ready to fly off to wherever and run a business. So some of the acquisitions that we made were made because it complemented our need for local management in those areas. And this is not a good reason. But I think under the surface, it's often the reason people do things and go to some countries because they like to travel there. Anyhow, the next one would be to consolidate an industry. So let's say you've got 5 competitors, and I think most people know that 3 competitors is a better industry than 5 or 6 or 7. It tends to be a more stable industry on a lot of measures. So sometimes acquisitions or partnerships are made to basically smooth out or stabilize an industry. Or it may be all of these reasons that you want to make a partnership or an acquisition or joint venture or some other business structure. The key point is having everybody signed up as to why we're doing this and agreeing as to why. The worst thing is, the CEO says, I want to get a new product, and the chief operating officer says, well, I want to get management skills. So getting internal consistency is important. So partnership strategy is, there's the where, what country and industry do I want to be in? There's the who, what companies are out there that might fulfill the list of needs I'm looking for. Number 3, the what, what's the structure that's going to work the best for us and hopefully for the potential partner. And number 4, how much? At the end of the day, if you're a public company, it's all about shareholder return. And so you've got to structure deals, hopefully, that are going to give the shareholders a better return than they could get by just throwing their money in the stock market or some other investment vehicle. So we've gone through the first 6 here. Now let's work our way through the last 5. Inspect what you expect. Trust but verify. There's no reason not to believe what people tell you in a PowerPoint presentation, but it's always a little better if you can go out and see it for yourself. And so I always urge business managers to spend as little time at their desk as they can and as much time as possible in their business, whatever it is, in the factory, in the marketplace, with distributors, with advertising agencies, with the government affairs people, whatever it is. Don't try and do it from your desk. Research is good, and we spend a lot of money on market research, millions of dollars on market research. But sometimes you got to trust your gut and go for something without that last piece of research that's going to make you feel just a little bit better, because there's a point where the enemy of the good is the better. Don't be afraid to pull the trigger on something without that last piece of research if there's a gut feel that gives you a certain belief. Stay away from your desk. Communicate at all levels often. We would do communication meetings with every employee in our foreign businesses twice a year at the least, and sometimes more, where we just sat in the breweries or sat in the business units in an environment not different from this, where we'd give a quick business review and remind people what we were trying to accomplish, but then just open it up for a Q&A session and really kind of find out what was on the employee's mind. And I think that was very useful. So, and an opportunity to learn a lot as well. Recruit for talent and train for knowledge and skills. This is the diagram that I would use to describe sort of how, what a good human resource approach is. First of all, you have to find good people. Sometimes it's from within the company, sometimes it's outside of the company. Then you have to develop those skills. You have to train them for what they're doing now, but really more importantly, train them for a future position down the road. There needs to be a mechanism for assessment and maybe assignments that help develop them. And then a good succession management effort is very important as well, particularly in countries where there's a lot of turnover among management. And in developing countries, that happens a lot. Let me explain. Western companies come in, talented people locally go to work for those Western companies, and then they become highly sought after because of their experience. And they're offered lots of money to jump to another company. So having a succession management plan is very important, because the turnover rates, for example, our turnover rate in China was 25%. That's a lot. And that was pretty good, actually. So you have to have a strong succession management program in place. Motivate. Probably there's not a topic that has had more written about it than how to motivate employees, I'm guessing. And it's a difficult thing, because people are motivated by lots of different reasons. But finding out the best way to put together a motivational component to your HR strategy will be important. And then finally, you've invested all this money in your people. You'd like to keep them around, right? And so you got to find ways to keep them and give them opportunities within the company so that they stay with you. But in general, what I try to do, and what I urge the people who worked for me to do when they were recruiting, is to kind of follow three major steps. First, I always look for people who are smarter than I was, because then the collective group was going to be better. And that also is a way to challenge me too, and help me develop, and vice versa. Try and hire passionate people who have more than just smarts. People who are not wallflowers if you're hiring for sales director. People who are very comfortable being in unfamiliar waters. At a cocktail party, they're the first one to come up and shake your hand and say, "Hi, I'm Steve Burrows, how you doing?" That's the person you want for your sales director. The person who goes to that same cocktail party and says, "Well, I noticed that we've consumed 24 bottles of Budweiser and 16 bottles of Bud Light and 13 bottles of Michelob." That might be the guy you want as your production manager, because he really knows what's going out the door. So, but have passion is a key element. Step 3, observe their behavior. Do they initiate conversation? Are they likable, self-sufficient, motivated? We would often, particularly in our sales and marketing area, we would take people to cocktail parties at some bar and just see how they interacted, how they got to know strangers. Because in those positions, you want people that are comfortable in that environment, especially. And then finally, treat them right. Of course, who isn't going to treat them right? And I don't mean pay and benefits and that sort of thing. I mean as an individual. Treat them the way you would want your boss to treat you. If you don't like to be shouted at when you make a mistake, don't shout at them when they make a mistake. So treat people right. Number 9, know your customer. There's a lot of customers to know and to develop a good business relationship with. There's the internal customers. So if I'm the marketing guy dreaming up all sorts of new packaging and sizes and colorful graphics, I need to establish a relationship with the production guys, the ones who are going to have to run this stuff down the line. And I also need to have good relations with external customers. In the beer business, of course, it's wholesalers, retailers, suppliers, the government. And every business has whatever external customers they have. And it's important to establish real meaningful relationships. Not that you're going to agree all the time, you frequently won't. But knowing where you disagree is as important as agreeing on things, because then everyone comes to the relationship with full transparency. And then know your consumers, obviously. Demographics, age, income, location, education, what have you. But knowing your customer truly, not just from reading research reports, but having roundtable sessions like this, where you can get their feedback direct, is also very useful. Okay, number 10, creating a management system. Companies are complicated. Even if they're little companies, people are running around doing things, and there needs to be some process management. Bigger companies are more complex, but it's not just a big company kind of a need. So creating a management system is important. And in my mind, a good management system is really just a process that's there so that you can kind of create things, you can debate them in a open-minded way. You can get alignment. It's a time where you can review things and make modifications of the company's objectives. So a management system should allow for these things to happen, to create, debate, align, review, and revise. And it's not something you just also do at the coffee pot every morning. You need some sort of a management system to do that. If you think about management, or if I think about management, I kind of break it into 4 major pieces, and there's a planning function, which is strategic and financial. Where do we want to take the company in the next 10 years? And then what's the money and the finances associated with that? So there's those 2 forms of planning. And then there's execution. What's our annual operating plan, and how are we going to review the business on some periodic basis and make changes, because it never goes the way you thought it would, ever. So you have to have a process in place that allows you to set these kind of broad, longer-term base goals, and then bring it down to an annual operating plan, which can be reviewed on a regular basis. And then, once again, none of this happens unless you've got strong leadership. And I don't mean just the CEO. I mean department heads. They're leaders of their group of people. So you need good leaders at lots of levels, not just the CEO. If you have a great leader who's a CEO, that's great. But if all the other department heads and division heads are not good leaders, the company's going to struggle in some way. So if you've got a strategic plan, it's kind of simple. Okay, what are we doing today? And what's the outcome if we don't change anything? Then here's some options. We might buy something, build something, merge with somebody, or maintain the status quo, or do something else. I don't know what it would be. And then what would our business look like if we did any of these. And so, that's just a very simple diagram of how you do some strategic planning. By the same token, if you're looking at a financial plan, what are we making today? What's going to change our profit in the future, like price? Are we going to raise price, lower price, discount more, discount less? What's our cost doing? Are we expanding? And what are some of the external drivers? Is the government going to throw on some kind of an excise tax onto our product? Is it going to restrict when or where we can sell? So those are all the things you think of on a financial plan as well. And then you wind up with, okay, well, what's it going to look like in 3 years? What are the investors expecting? They might expect a 10% return on your stock. Your plan may only deliver 5. That's not good. So you got to find a way to fill that gap between the investor expectation, if you're a public company, and what you have in your base plan. This is real busy, but it's just an example of, this is the way my company did this was their system, if you will. This was the annual process we went through to try and keep a $16 billion company aimed in some reasonable direction for growth. So in February, we did all of our long-range strategic planning. And then in April, we did all of our long-range financial planning. And then we had our board approve both of those things. And then all the division heads worked on those things and created the next year's operating plan over the course of the summer, which was then presented to our management in the fall and then approved by our board of directors in December. So that was our process. And everybody knew what it was, so you could plan for it and knew what the expectations were. The important thing is to have a process and a system by which you manage your company. So leadership is the last piece of that. And in my mind, and this may or may not be correct, it's what I believe. I think good leaders have 4 characteristics. They have some capability to think strategically. They don't have to be the world's greatest strategist, but they have the ability to think beyond today and imagine what we might do in the future with the business. They have to be excellent communicators. If you can't communicate with individuals one-on-one or a group this size, then it's difficult to be a strong and engaging leader. I think most importantly, you have to understand and value people, because at the end of the day, as you move up the ranks in your career, you're going to find that you spend less and less time on the technical side of what you do and more time managing people, because people are complex, and you need to understand the value of people as a good leader. And then finally, I think operational experience is important. I don't have anything against staff positions in a company. You've got the lawyers and the finance department and other areas that are what would typically be called staff. They aren't bad people, but I like people to have in the trenches operational experience where they've had to take a plan, develop it, execute it, hopefully succeed, but maybe fail, and accept the rewards and the penalties that go along with that. So I think earning your operational stripes is an important characteristic that a leader needs to have. And number 11 is you must make mistakes. And I have 3 quotes here that sort of summarize this better than I can. The first is Oscar Wilde. Everybody knows who that is. Experience is simply the name we give our mistakes. And then athletic coach, Tommy Prothero, he said, we learn from our mistakes, and the amount we learn is in direct proportion to the amount we suffer having made the mistake. And this couldn't be more true. When I lost $60 million a year for 4 years in a Japan joint venture, that was painful, and I learned a lot that I carried with me for many years after that. So it's true. And then finally, my boss at the time, August Bush III, he said, experience comes from failure, and failure comes from experience. And he who tries may fail, but will gain experience. And he who does not try will not fail, but will gain no experience. And his management style was such that his top lieutenants had all failed, many more than once, because he valued failure as a really strong learning opportunity for his top management team. So when you have the opportunity to be in a company or be working, having people work for you, allow them to fail, because they're probably going to learn and get better from it, which will be better for the company potentially. If they do the same thing wrong repeatedly, that's different. So here's a couple of mistakes and failures which I survived. The first one I've already talked about, the Japan joint venture, where we lost a lot of money, and my failure there was not knowing when to say when. You know, how many $60 million losses was it going to take, Steve, before you thought you might do something different? It shouldn't have taken as many as it did. The second one was a big acquisition we made. In fact, to this day, it's the largest acquisition that the company ever made. It was $800 billion, or $800 million, excuse me. And we bought a company that had 25 breweries underneath it. And for a number of reasons, there was only a certain amount of due diligence we could do. And so according to the company's books and all the due diligence we did on their financials, it looked like the company made a certain amount of money, and we were satisfied with that. Well, by the time we bought the company and really got into the books, the company made that much money. And we had just spent $800 million. Now, it all turned out well in the end for other reasons, but the learning point there was there's no such thing as too much due diligence. Operators typically hate due diligence. They just want to go in and buy the thing and have business. And then it's always the finance guys and the auditors and the lawyers and those guys who say, no, we got to have all this due diligence. As painful as that is, do it, because it'll save you potentially heartache and pain and suffering later. And then finally, this is one from way back in when I was the head of marketing in the US company. We had a big promotion. I think it was for Memorial Day, or maybe it was all the summer holidays. And you would go to retail, you would buy 12 packs, and inside there was like a lottery ticket. And you scratch it off, and you could win a variety of prizes. One of the prizes was a jet ski. Well, the promotion had been out for not very long, and all of a sudden we had way, way more jet ski winners than we had budgeted for, like thousands more. So there was a big problem. And the problem, of course, was, and this gets back to inspect what you expect, that the winning tickets had been misprinted. So instead of having, I don't remember the numbers precisely, but let's say there were going to be 100 jet ski winners, there were going to be 100,000 jet ski winners. You know, do the math on the cost of a jet ski. And this thing was going to be a very expensive, we weren't going to sell enough beer for a long time to pay that off. So we had to go into a disaster mode and make the consumers happy without breaking the bank of the marketing budget. So that was a inspect what you expect kind of a lesson learned. So as a manager, encourage people to try and do new things, reward innovation and revolutionary thinking, and be open to it, because that's how change happens. If you have a sort of a personality that you don't say no, but everything else about your body language says no, that puts a governor on innovative thinking and new ideas, and that can be problematic. Don't punish mistakes, but learn from them, and be patient. One of the things that I would do in the annual review of the people that reported to me was I didn't use a very traditional scoring device that many HR people would do. I asked a number of questions. One question I said was, tell me something you think you did really well this year and why it worked really well. And another question I asked was, tell me where you failed this year and why you failed and what you learned from it. And then we'd have a dialogue around those two things, along with a few other items on the review. But to me, it's just so important to work this area, to allow people to take risk and push the edge a little bit further out. And that encourages growth and innovation. So that's the 11 management lessons I wanted to share with you today. There's only one more, and that is make sure you have fun. I loved my job. I loved all my jobs at the brewery. I was very lucky. You got to have fun in what you're doing, otherwise you're not going to be at your best. So if you're in an environment where you're not having fun, look for something else to do, because you'll enjoy it a lot more and you'll be a better employee for it. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
Can you make some comments about language and customs that you had to learn, or crash courses that happened, or?
Yeah, I wish I would have stayed in that Spanish class here, that's for sure. You know, my one regret is that I didn't, other than, I'll call it mediocre Spanish, that I never took the time to really get very good in a particular foreign language, because it just would have made life a lot easier. So I always urge students that I come in contact with to try and do that, to try and get good at a sort of a broad-based foreign language. Because if you have any, not even international business aspirations, nowadays, you know, international has a whole different, it's different than it was just 30 years ago when I started at international. You know, now you don't even have to leave town to be international. But you still need a lot of the skills that you would have had if you moved overseas. So getting that language now is just as important, even though you may never leave the building, because you're still going to come in contact. So, and culturally, I guess one of the things I made my share of cultural faux pas. None of them were so serious that it ruined the relationship. And I think the best advice I give people is, you know, get smart on the culture to the extent you can. And then if you make a mistake, just say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that, and move on. And most people are understanding with that outcome. Yes, hi.
Hi. I'm curious about any tips about repatriating someone who's been abroad for an extended period of time. I know that when people come back, they come back different.
Yeah, and it's hard to come back.
It's real hard to come back. So in your experience, either at Anheuser-Busch or in your consulting work, what have you done? What works to repatriate?
Well, I can tell you Anheuser-Busch did very poorly in this area in the 90s. You know, we'd send people off to overseas assignments and nobody remembered them. And then when they finished their tour of duty and came back, there was I don't want to say nothing there for them, but there was not an easy reentry professionally. Not to mention all the personal things that go with a repatriation, which are enormous for an individual and a family and everything else. Later on, we got better at it. I think the thing that worked the best is to have a full-time mentor back home. So when you would send somebody overseas, there was someone in a leadership role, not you know, a lower level employee, but a senior executive in the division who was your mentor. And their responsibility was to stay connected with you, to come visit you on, you know, some frequency over the course of your assignment, to have you in to the home office for whatever reason, and most expatriates are always back for some vacation time every year, or to invite them back for big important meetings that the company was having, so that there was always some kind of ongoing connection. And then as a part of our succession plan at the company, we had this gigantic room with org charts all over the place with high performers and all this, but we had one whole section that was just expatriates and when they're due back. And so that the management of the company was always looking at who was coming back and where they might be placed in the organization. So in the beginning, we were really bad at it. In the end, we were much better. But I think having a mentor and having in-country and in-home office interaction and visibility to the rest of the company about who's doing what overseas and where they might come back into the company. If you do those three things, I think it works pretty well. You're welcome. Yes?
I was curious about how did Anheuser-Busch compete with European beers in the sports industry? So Carlsberg is the official sponsor of Liverpool Football Club, and Heineken sponsors the UEFA Championship League. How did an American brand try to stand out or try to compete with the Europeans overseas?
Yeah, and football, or soccer football, is the biggest sport in the world. And so one of the things we did was we sponsored the World Cup, which is the Super Bowl of soccer, if you will. But there's a lot of really great local soccer sponsorships available, and we had some. I mean, we always tried to, our strategy for sports was international, national, local, and then even very local. So take a sport, and if it has competitions in the international arena, the ideal situation was you would sponsor the whole vertical offering. So you try and sponsor it internationally, nationally, regionally, or locally, and then maybe the city softball team, for example. Now, not all sports do that, but that's where things like the Olympics kind of give you a big umbrella to play under, because the Olympics is a lot of sports that then you can come in locally and say, okay, I sponsor the Olympics, but over here I sponsor the Chinese National Table Tennis Association for ping pong. And then locally I do the city ping pong championship. So that's the approach we use. It takes a long time to get there because there's other guys who are sitting on those sponsorships. And sometimes you can get them and sometimes you can't. But yeah, our basic strategy was sports is good, music and entertainment are good, find ways to do it at the very top level all the way down to the very local level.
Okay, and then follow up with that, are sports and music, are those the two biggest, I won't say markets you go into, but the two biggest ones to develop brand loyalty, especially for younger age demographics?
Depends a little bit on the market structure. For example, when we went to China in 1992, we sort of went in there with our U.S. marketing hat on, and our mix of pull, like advertising and that sort of thing, was about 70% in the U.S., and push, which would be more trade marketing, was about 30%. So we thought, well, let's try that in China. And it didn't work. So the route to the consumer brand awareness and eventually loyalty was actually started by working the retail trade very hard, because the structure of the marketplace there is that the retailer he doesn't have every brand. So you need to go in and do something for him to get him to put your product in the retail account. And so spending a lot of money on advertising was a complete waste of money until you had a base of distribution where people could actually buy the product. So we kind of inverted things, and instead of being 70% advertising kind of consumer pull, we were 80% trade push in China in the beginning. And even, I don't know what it is today, but even in 2008 when I left, we still weren't even 50-50. We're still more weighted towards trade marketing development. So it really depends a little bit on the market and also how you're in there. If you're with a partner that's really strong, that sets up different opportunities. Sure.
I have a question.
Yes, Chris.
Actually, maybe there are two questions. I'm not sure. I'm curious how you think the craft beer industry is affecting brands like Anheuser-Busch or Budweiser. And then I've been really struck by, it seems in the last maybe few months, Budweiser has come out with some very unique, I assume they're different beers different bottles, very differentiated markets. And I'm curious if that's an attempt to sort of fight craft breweries, if they're trying to grow a market, if they're trying to differentiate and hang on to market share.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you what's going on with the Brazilians at Anheuser-Busch these days, but I personally, because the craft thing has been around for a number of years, it's only recently it's really kind of exploded. I think the craft beer is great for the beer industry because it adds a dimension of uniqueness and craftsmanship and specialness that big brewer brands sort of are considered to be more mass-produced, no attention to the detail, just, throw the stuff in, it comes out of, and where, with craft beers, you envision this guy, carefully mixing the ingredients. And plus the fact that they have all sorts of weird flavors and so forth kind of support that notion. So I think craft beer has been good for the industry because it has people talking about the industry. And it's drawn people into the industry who might not have been there. They might have been drinking RTDs, Smirnoff Ice and those things, which for a number of years, along with spirits, kind of really gave the U.S. beer industry a hard time because a lot of younger people, instead of starting on beer, were moving into those drinks. They were fruity and sweet and easy to drink as opposed to, everybody remembers their first beer. It wasn't that good, right? So those RTDs gave young consumers a chance to get into the category, but it wasn't beer. So when crafts came along, it kind of gave that same cohort or those of a similar age a more interesting reason to try beer. So I think it was good. Now it's a love-hate deal. It's only good to the point where they steal our market share, right? But I think it's made the big brewers more creative as well. They've all come with various, Blue Moon is a very popular, kind of craft-like beer from Coors. And Shock Top was a similar attempt by Anheuser-Busch to kind of get into that craft era, which I think has had some reasonable success. So I think it's, competition is good. And I think the craft brewers have made the big brewers better by creating that competition. And everybody seems to be doing reasonably well. Personally, I think it's going to be a huge shakeout of craft brewers one of these days because there's just an awful lot of them. And I don't know how well they all do financially, but I think it's a good thing.
And let us not forget that really important concept, don't be afraid to fail.
Exactly right.
Because we'll all do it many times.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much, Steve.
You're welcome, Chris.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I know there are many other things you could do with your time. We really appreciate it. I think for the students, the opportunity to hear from somebody who went to school here and see, the kind of enormous success you've had. It's really, I think, meaningful for them to understand that could be them someday, and for you to share your advice. I think also we have a lot of faculty and staff here, and it's really wonderful to have you talk about your experiences and give them something substantive to take back in the classroom to hang their theory on. So.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask for me to stop by when I'm here. Chris knows that whenever I come for these board meetings, I always try and do something else. So. And
he's extraordinarily accessible to us, and we really appreciate it. So a hand for Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
And I also know that many of you know, and I want Steve to know as well, he gave us permission to videotape today, and so this will all be available to everyone, and I'm sure it will get a lot more play from this point on, too.
I hope so.
Thanks so much, Steve.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.